My name is Carol, I'm 65 years old. And my own son told me he was tired of seeing me in the very house I bought for him. Before I tell you how I secretly sold that house from right under his feet and left him with an eviction notice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The plastic handles of the grocery bags were digging into my palms. I remember that so clearly. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, and the Ohio sun was slanting through the living room window, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. I'd just come from Kroger humming a little tune, thinking about the pot roast I was going to make for dinner. Their favorite. Then I saw him. My son Michael was standing there blocking the path to the kitchen. He was tall, just like his father, but the warmth his dad always had in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, flat emptiness. His wife, Jessica, stood just behind his shoulder, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "Mom," he started, and the single word hung in the air thick and ugly. "I'm tired of seeing you every day." The bags dropped from my hands. A carton of eggs smashed on the hardwood floor, the yolk spreading like a sick yellow stain. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a statement, it was a verdict. A life sentence delivered in 7 words. What did you say, Michael?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. I prayed I'd heard him wrong. Maybe the long shift I'd picked up at the clinic last week had finally caught up to me. He didn't even have the decency to look away. "Jessica and I, we need our space. We need our own life. You're just always here. You should find another place. Find another place." The words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. This house. This beautiful 2-story colonial with the big oak tree in the front yard. This wasn't just a place. This was my sacrifice. After my husband, David, passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, I was left with a modest life insurance policy and the money from selling our small starter home. It wasn't a fortune, but it was everything. Every last dime from a 40-year nursing career. Every penny David and I had saved for our retirement. Michael and Jessica were getting married, struggling with student loans and car payments. They couldn't even get approved for a small apartment lease. So I did what any mother would do. I took all of it, the insurance money, the house money, my entire future, and I bought this house for them. I paid cash. No mortgage, no debt. The title was solely in my name, a safety net I thought would protect us all. I just wanted my only son to have a good start, a solid foundation his father would have been proud of. "You'll always have a home here, Mom," Michael had said on the day I gave him the keys, his eyes wet with tears as he hugged me. Always. That promise now felt like a cruel joke. In the beginning it was fine. I took the smallest bedroom downstairs, the one by the laundry room, so they could have the master suite. I cooked, I cleaned, I did their laundry. I was happy to help. But then Jessica's little comments started. "Oh, Carol, nobody makes meatloaf like that anymore. Don't you think it's a little strange for your mother to still be here when we have friends over?" she'd whisper to Michael, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. Slowly my son started to pull away. He'd come home from his accounting job and go straight upstairs. Dinners became silent, tense affairs. I started eating alone in my room, just to avoid the suffocating feeling of being an intruder in my own home. I was a ghost, haunting the hallways of the life I had paid for. And now this. So I'm just a burden? The words tasted like ash in my mouth. It was Jessica who answered, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We just think it's time you had your own life, Carol. For your own good." I looked at Michael, my heart pleading with him. "Say something. Defend me. Be the boy I raised." He just stared back, his expression hardening. "She's right, Mom. It's for the best." That was it. The final snap. Something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for years under the weight of their disrespect, finally broke. But it didn't break into tears. It shattered into a million pieces of cold, hard ice. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. The shock was turning into something else. Something dangerous. I looked from my son's cold eyes to his wife's triumphant smirk. They thought they had one. They thought the quiet, accommodating mother would just pack her bags and disappear, leaving them with a free house and a clear conscience. I bent down, my knees cracking in protest, and I picked up a single unbroken egg from the floor. I held it in my palm, feeling its fragile smoothness. I could crush it. I could throw it. I could scream until the windows rattled. But I didn't. I stood up slowly, my back straight. I looked directly at Michael, and for the first time in a very long time I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. An opponent. I nodded slowly, my voice surprisingly steady. All right, Michael. If that's what you want. I turned and walked towards my small bedroom, the crunch of eggshells under my shoes marking every step. I could feel their confused stares on my back. They were probably expecting a scene, a guilt trip, a flood of tears. They got silence. I closed my bedroom door, the click of the latch sounding like the cocking of a gun. I didn't sink onto the bed. I didn't reach for a tissue. I walked over to my nightstand, pulled out a pen and a small leather-bound notebook. I sat down, the anger now a laser-focused beam in my mind. They wanted me gone. Fine. I would go. But I wasn't going to leave them with my house. I wasn't going to leave them with my dignity. I was going to leave them with absolutely nothing. My hand didn't shake as I opened the notebook to a clean page. They had made a critical mistake. They had confused my kindness for weakness. And as I started to write, the first name on my list wasn't a moving company. It was a lawyer. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The first person I called wasn't a lawyer. It was Brenda. We've been friends for 40 years, ever since we were rookie nurses on the night shift together. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't even have to say much. She could hear the ice in my voice. When I told her what Michael had said, there was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Then she exploded. That ungrateful, spineless little brat, she roared, and I had to hold the phone away from my ear. After everything you've done? After the funeral, after the house, after giving them your entire life? Oh, Carol, you are not going anywhere with your tail between your legs. You hear me? Her anger was a bomb on my own frozen rage. It was the validation I needed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This was a betrayal of the highest order. I'm not Bren, I said, my voice low. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to war. Good, she said, her tone shifting from fury to strategy. I know a guy. His name is Frank Henderson. He's a real estate agent, old school. Handled my cousin's messy divorce situation a few years back. He's discreet as a priest in confession and sharp as a tack. He doesn't suffer fools. He'll be perfect. The next morning, I met Frank Henderson at a quiet, family-owned diner on the edge of town. He was in his late 60s with a kind face but eyes that didn't miss a thing. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole ugly story, my voice never wavering. I didn't cry. I was far beyond tears. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his black coffee. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He just got straight to business. The title is solely in your name, you said? Ironclad. I confirmed. I have the original deed locked away. And you want to sell? I want to sell, I repeated, leaning forward. I want to sell it fast and I want to sell it quietly. They can't know. Not until it's too late. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, a flicker of understanding, maybe even admiration in his eyes. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. In this market, a house like yours in that neighborhood paid in full? It's a diamond. I have a list of clients, young professionals, small families, who are pre-approved and looking to close quickly. They're tired of bidding wars. They'll pay cash for a sure thing. How quickly? I pressed. He tapped his pen on the notebook. If you're serious and if the house is as good as I remember it being, I could have a solid above asking, all-cash offer on your table in 3 days. We could close the entire deal in a week. Maybe 10 days tops. 1 week. The words sang in my ears. 1 week of playing the part of the sad, defeated mother while the ground was silently shifting beneath their feet. I could already picture the look on their faces. The sheer unadulterated shock. Mr. Henderson, I said, extending my hand across the sticky vinyl tabletop. Let's do it. He shook my hand firmly. Call me Frank. I'll draw up the listing agreement this afternoon. We'll keep it off the public market, a private listing. I'll only show it to my most trusted clients. They won't know anything about the family situation. To them it's just a house. To me it was justice. I walked out of that diner feeling a strange sense of calm. The path forward was clear. There would be no more begging for scraps of affection. No more making myself small to fit into the corners of my own life. I was taking the board back. I was changing the rules of the game they thought they were playing. That night, when Michael came downstairs for a glass of water, he saw me sitting in the dark living room. He actually looked a little guilty. "Mom, are you okay?" I looked up at him and I gave him a small, sad smile. It was the best acting performance of my life. "I'll be fine, honey. I just need a little time to figure things out." He nodded, relieved. "Yeah, okay." He thought he was dealing with a wounded bird. He had no idea he was dealing with a phoenix, quietly gathering her strength in the ashes. The plan was in motion, but I couldn't possibly imagine the depths of cruelty they would resort to once they realized I wasn't just going to disappear quietly. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. I operated like a phantom in my own house. My routine was my cover. I'd get up, make coffee, and see Michael and Jessica off to work. Jessica with a dismissive wave, Michael with a mumbled but he couldn't quite meet my eyes to say. The moment their cars were out of the driveway, my real work began. I didn't start with clothes or furniture. I started with the soul of the house, the things that were truly mine. In the attic, tucked away in a cedar chest, was my mother's silverware, each piece wrapped in soft flannel. I packed it carefully into an unmarked cardboard box. Next came the paintings my late husband David and I had collected from local art fairs, the small, beautiful landscapes that held our memories. They came down from the walls, leaving pale, ghostly rectangles behind. Every box was a silent rebellion. I labeled them with a simple code, K for kitchen, B for books, and stacked them neatly in my closet, hiding them behind my winter coats. Brenda would come by in the afternoons, her minivan a getaway car. We worked in hushed efficiency like two seasoned burglars. "This feels so wrong and so right at the same time," she whispered one afternoon, hefting a heavy box of photo albums. "It's the most right thing I've done in years," I whispered back. We moved the boxes to a small climate-controlled storage unit I'd rented under my maiden name on the other side of town. It was my secret headquarters, my treasure chest. On Thursday afternoon, Frank Henderson called. His voice was low and steady. "Carol, I have them. A young doctor and his wife. He's just starting at the hospital. They're looking to plant roots. They're motivated, they have the cash. And they can see the house at 3 o'clock. Can you make that happen?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yes. The house will be empty." I immediately texted Michael. My fingers flew across the screen, composing the perfect lie. "Hi honey, the main water line to the house is acting up. A plumber needs to come and do a full system flush this afternoon. It's going to be loud and messy. Best if you and Jessica stay away until after 6. His reply came back in less than a minute. "Okay. THX for handling." He didn't care about the details. He didn't care about the house. He just cared that I was still playing the role of the caretaker, the problem solver, the one who handled things. It was perfect. At 2:30 I did a final sweep. I fluffed the pillows, wiped the counters, and opened the curtains to let in the afternoon light. I was selling a dream, a warm, happy family home. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. At 3 o'clock sharp, Frank arrived with the young couple, the Millers. They were bright-eyed and full of hope, and my heart ached for them, for the life I had once imagined for my own son in this very house. "It's beautiful," Mrs. Miller breathed, stepping into the foyer. I gave them the grand tour, pointing out the crown molding, the new appliances I'd insisted on last year, the big backyard where I had pictured my future grandchildren playing. With every word, I was selling off a piece of my broken heart. But my voice was steady, my smile was warm. I was the perfect homeowner, ready to pass her beloved home on to the next generation. They spent an hour opening every closet, checking every faucet. When they were done, they stood in the kitchen, whispering to each other. Then Dr. Miller turned to me, his expression serious. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, using my last name. "We love it. We've been looking for months and this is it. We're prepared to make you an all-cash offer, 10% over your asking price. If you'll accept it today, we can close in a week." Frank gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. This was it. The end game. I put my hand to my chest, feigning surprise and deliberation. "Oh my, that's so generous. Yes, I accept." We sat at the dining room table, the very table where my son had passed his sentence on me, and signed the initial offer. The pen felt heavy in my hand, each letter of my signature a final, decisive strike. They were so excited, so grateful. They had no idea they were my saviors. As Frank walked them to the door, I stood in the silent living room, the signed contract clutched in my hand. It was done. The biggest piece of the plan had fallen into place. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a flicker of real hope. With the purchase offer signed and tucked away safely, I felt the first real wave of relief in months. Little did I know this initial victory was about to trigger their first truly despicable move against me. The next morning, I was carefully wrapping David's collection of antique maps when my phone rang. It was Mr. Davis, the lawyer Brenda had insisted I hire. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who had seen his fair share of messy family disputes. His voice, usually calm and measured, was tight with urgency. "Carol, good morning. I'm sorry to call so early, but something has come up. Something serious." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What is it, Bill?" "I just received a call from a colleague over at Fifth Third Bank," he said. "He's in their fraud prevention department. He called me as a professional courtesy because he saw my name on your original house deed. Carol, someone tried to take out a home equity line of credit against your property yesterday afternoon. For $200,000. The world tilted on its axis. I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to stay upright. "What? That's impossible. I haven't spoken to a bank in months. The house is paid off." "I know," he said, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "That's what flagged it for them. The application was submitted online. The problem, Carol, is how they submitted it." He paused, and his next words landed like punches. "They included a scanned copy of a notarized power of attorney. It gives Michael and Jessica full and irrevocable control over all your financial assets, including real estate. It was dated 6 months ago." "No," I whispered. "No, I never signed anything like that. I would never. My signature was my bond. I was meticulous with documents. I would remember." "I didn't think you did," Bill said grimly. "My colleague faxed me a copy. Carol, the signature is a perfect match to the one on your deed. It's a flawless forgery. And the notary stamp. It's from a notary public who passed away last year. This is a sophisticated piece of fraud." I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone slick in my hand. My mind was reeling. They hadn't just been planning to push me out. They had been planning to rob me blind. While I was cooking their dinners and washing their clothes, they were plotting to steal the very roof over our heads, the last tangible piece of my life with David. The greed of it, the sheer, cold-blooded audacity was staggering. They weren't just ungrateful. They were criminals. This wasn't about wanting their space. This was a heist. The $200,000 was probably for a new car for Jessica, a down payment on some business venture for Michael, a life of luxury built on the foundation of my ruin. They were going to drain the equity and leave me with a mountain of debt on a house I couldn't even live in. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it scared me. "We fight back hard," Bill said, "all business. I've already informed the bank that the document is fraudulent and that you are the sole owner, with no intention of borrowing against the property. They've frozen the application and opened an internal investigation. This attempt failed, Carol. But it tells us exactly who we're dealing with. They will stop at nothing." He was right. This changed everything. My quiet, secret plan to sell the house felt almost quaint now. This was no longer just about teaching my son a lesson or escaping a toxic environment. This was a battle for my survival. They had tried to strip me of my financial independence, to leave me destitute and powerless. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my maternal love for senile incompetence. That afternoon I met with Bill in his office. I laid out the whole plan, the secret sale, the cash offer, the one-week closing. He listened without interruption, his face impassive. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair. "It's bold, Carol. And it's brilliant. But now it has to be airtight. We need to move even faster." We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail, every potential loophole. He put in calls to Frank Henderson and the title company, expediting the paperwork. He drafted letters and prepared affidavits. Watching him work, I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't alone in this. I walked out of his office that day a different woman. The hurt was still there, a deep throbbing ache in my chest. But it was now overlaid with a layer of tempered steel. They had shown me their hand. They had shown me that they saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle, a bank account to be drained. They thought they could erase me with a forged signature on a piece of paper. I thought forgery was the lowest they could sink. I was wrong. It was only the beginning of their campaign to destroy me. Of all the things they did, this was the one that broke me. Not for good, but for a moment, it shattered my composure and showed me the blackness in their hearts. It was about Buddy. Buddy was my 12-year-old golden retriever. David and I had gotten him as a puppy, just a bundle of blonde fur and clumsy paws. After David died, Buddy became my shadow, my confidant, my living, breathing connection to the best years of my life. He'd rest his big, graying head on my lap in the evenings. He'd greet me at the door with a slowly wagging tail as if I'd been gone for weeks, not hours. Michael and Jessica tolerated him, but Jessica was always complaining about the dog hair on her black yoga pants. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, 2 days after the incident with the bank. I had Buddy out in the front yard. He wasn't much for chasing balls anymore, but he loved to lie in a patch of sun on the grass. I was pulling a few weeds from the flower bed when a white van pulled up to the curb. It had the official seal of the county animal control on the side. My stomach clenched. A young woman in a khaki uniform got out, holding a clipboard. She had a kind but professional demeanor. "Ma'am, are you the resident here?" she asked. "Yes, I am," I said, my hand instinctively going to rest on Buddy's back. He looked up at her and gave a lazy thump of his tail. She glanced down at him, then back at her clipboard. "We received an anonymous call, ma'am. A report concerning a senior golden retriever at this address. The report states the dog is being neglected, possibly malnourished, and has shown signs of aggression towards delivery drivers." The air left my lungs in a rush. I stared at her, speechless. Neglected? Aggressive? Buddy? My gentle, loving old boy who thought the UPS driver was his best friend? It was absurd. It was a lie. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone exactly who had made that anonymous call. That's a lie," I stammered, finding my voice. "Look at him. Does he look neglected to you?" The officer knelt down. Buddy, being the friendly soul he was, immediately leaned in and licked her chin. She laughed, scratching him behind the ears. He closed his eyes in bliss. "He seems like a sweetheart," she said, her professional mask slipping for a moment. She ran her hand over his coat. "He's in great shape for an older dog. Good weight, clean coat. Definitely not neglected." She stood up, her eyes softening with sympathy as she looked at me. The color must have drained from my face. "Ma'am, are you having any disagreements with anyone? Neighbors? Family?" she asked gently. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "We get calls like this sometimes," she said, her voice low. "Malicious reports. People using our department to harass someone during a dispute. It's a sad thing." She made a few notes on her clipboard. "I'm closing this report as unfounded. There's absolutely no issue here. You have a beautiful dog, and you're clearly taking wonderful care of him." She gave Buddy one last pat before getting back in her van. As it drove away, I sank to my knees on the lawn and wrapped my arms around my dog's neck. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I cried. It wasn't the quiet, heartbroken weeping of before. It was a storm. Great gut-wrenching sobs of pure, undiluted rage. They had tried to take my home. They had tried to steal my savings and put me in debt. And now they had come for him. They had tried to use a government agency to rip the last piece of my husband, the only source of unconditional love I had left in that house, right out of my arms. They could have branded him aggressive. They could have taken him away, locked him in a cage at the pound. An old dog like him, he wouldn't have survived it. They knew that. This wasn't just a petty act of revenge. It was an act of profound cruelty, designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain. It was an attempt to emotionally cripple me, to break my will to fight. But as I held my warm, breathing dog, my tears of grief hardened into resolve. They had miscalculated. They hadn't broken me. They had just shown me that there was no line they wouldn't cross, no depth they wouldn't sink to. And in doing so, they had freed me from any last, lingering shred of familial obligation or maternal sentiment. These were not my children. They were monsters. They had tried to take my home. They had tried to steal my money. Now they had tried to take away the only living soul that gave me unconditional love. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. The following Saturday was supposed to be the day. The day I signed the final closing papers and handed over the keys. Frank Henderson had arranged for a mobile notary to come to the house at noon. My plan was to sign, pack my last suitcase, and be gone before Michael and Jessica even got home from their weekend errands. But they had other plans. At 9 in the morning there was a loud official knock on the front door. Not a friendly rap, but a heavy authoritative thud. My heart leaped into my throat. Through the peephole I saw 2 uniformed police officers. I opened the door, my face a carefully composed mask of calm inquiry. Buddy stood beside me, giving a low, uncertain woof. "Ma'am, are you Carol Peterson?" the older officer asked. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" Just then Michael and Jessica came jogging up the driveway, dressed in their workout clothes, feigning breathlessness and concern. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, officers," Jessica panted, clutching Michael's arm. "We were so worried." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. The officer turned back to me, his expression grim. "Ma'am, we've received a call from your son, Mr. Peterson. He alleges that you are in the process of illegally disposing of joint marital assets and family property without his consent." I nearly laughed. Joint marital assets? The only thing we jointly owned was a deep and abiding sense of mutual resentment. "Officers," I said, my voice as cool and even as a frozen lake, "there must be a misunderstanding. Please come in." I led them into the living room. Michael and Jessica followed, positioning themselves by the fireplace like the aggrieved victims they were pretending to be. "Mom, we had to do it," Michael said, his voice laced with phony regret. "This house. It's our family's main asset. It's part of my inheritance. You can't just sell it out from under us." Inheritance. The word hung in the air, so full of entitlement it was practically dripping. "Your inheritance?" I repeated softly, then turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, this house is not a marital asset. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and it is certainly not my son's inheritance, as I am, you may have noticed, still very much alive." I walked over to the built-in bookshelf, unlocked a small drawer, and pulled out a heavy waterproof document folder. I placed it on the coffee table and opened it. "This," I said, sliding a document across the table, "is the deed to this house. As you can see, it is solely in my name, Carolyn Peterson, purchased in cash. No co-signers, no co-owners." I then produced the purchase agreement for the house, along with the bank statement showing the massive withdrawal from my personal savings account to pay for it. I had every receipt, every piece of paper. The younger officer picked up the deed and examined it carefully. He looked at Michael. "Sir, is your name on this document?" Michael's face flushed a blotchy red. "Well, no, but it was understood." "There is no understood in property law, sir," the older officer cut in, his patience clearly wearing thin. He looked through the bank statements. "Ma'am, these documents seem to be in perfect order. As far as the law is concerned, this is your property to do with as you see fit." Jessica's face, which had been a mask of worried concern, was now twisting into an ugly snarl of disbelief. But what about all the furniture? The things inside? That's family property." I smiled, a thin, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Funny you should mention that." I reached back into my folder and pulled out another, even thicker stack of papers. "This is the receipt for the sofa, from Ashley Furniture, paid with my credit card. Here is the receipt for the dining room set, the television, the refrigerator." I went on, producing documentation for nearly every significant item in the house. "I am not disposing of family property. I am preparing to sell my house, along with the belongings that I, and I alone, purchased." The officers exchanged a look. They had walked into a family drama, and they wanted out. The older one cleared his throat. "Well, ma'am, it appears this is a civil matter, not a police matter. There's no crime being committed here. We'll be leaving." They turned to go, and I walked them to the door. As they stepped outside, I turned back to face my son and his wife. They were standing frozen, their trap having snapped shut on their own feet. The moment the front door clicked shut, The silence in the room was deafening. I let it stretch out, savoring the panic that was finally dawning in their eyes. Then I delivered the final blow. "The police were right," I said quietly. "This is a civil matter. And it's been resolved. I sold the house. The final papers will be signed in." I glanced at my watch. "Less than 3 hours. The new owners will take possession this evening. You have 4 days to find a new place to live and remove your personal belongings. After that, you will be trespassing." Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You didn't," he whispered. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," I said, walking past them towards the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea. "And I did. You wanted your own life. Now you have it. You're on your own." I watched the panic finally dawn in their eyes. They were trapped. And I was beginning to learn that a trapped animal is the most dangerous kind. That night, the house felt like a powder keg with a lit fuse. They stayed upstairs, whispering furiously behind their closed bedroom door. I stayed downstairs, methodically packing my last few personal items, the silence broken only by the screech of packing tape. I could feel their hatred radiating down through the floorboards. Around midnight, just as I was starting to doze off in my armchair, I was jolted awake by a loud crash from the living room. It sounded like shattering glass. I grabbed the heavy iron fireplace poker and crept out of my room. The scene in the living room made my blood run cold. They had gone on a rampage. Michael and Jessica were tearing the room apart. Drawers were pulled out and overturned, papers and books scattered across the floor. Jessica had a wild, desperate look in her eyes as she swept a shelf of my porcelain figurines onto the floor, where they shattered into 100 pieces. "What in God's name are you doing?" I screamed, my voice raw. Michael spun around. He had a stack of files in his hands. "Where is it, Mom?" he yelled, his face contorted with rage. "Where is the sales contract? We know you have a copy." Jessica advanced on me, her finger pointing like a weapon. "We're going to find it, and we're going to find a loophole. A lawyer can stop this. You can't just throw us out on the street." They were like vultures tearing apart the carcass of our family life, looking for one last scrap to salvage. They thought if they could just find and destroy that piece of paper, reality would somehow bend to their will. "You're insane," I said, gripping the poker tighter. "Destroying my property isn't going to change the fact that the sale is legally filed with the county. It's over." The next day was a blur of frantic activity. I had to get out. I called Brenda, my voice shaking. "They've lost it, Bren. I'm not safe here." She was there in 20 minutes. We decided I would spend the last few nights at her place. I just needed to get my suitcases and Buddy. While Brenda waited in the car, I ran upstairs to grab my things. That's when my phone rang. It was Brenda, her voice a panicked whisper. "Carol, get out of there now." A moving truck just pulled up in front of the house. A big one. Jessica is outside talking to the driver and pointing at the house. I ran to the window. Sure enough, a massive moving truck was parked at the curb. 2 burly men were walking up the driveway towards Jessica. My stomach plummeted. She wasn't waiting for me to leave. She was trying to steal my furniture right out from under me. Right in broad daylight. She was probably going to sell it all before I even knew it was gone. I flew down the stairs and burst out the front door just as the 2 movers were about to enter. Jessica's head whipped around, her face a mask of fury at being caught. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled, planting myself in front of the door, the fireplace poker still in my hand. "I'm just helping you move, Mom," she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Since you're in such a hurry to leave." I ignored her and addressed the movers directly. "Gentlemen, this woman does not live here, and she has no authority to remove anything from this property. Everything inside this house belongs to me. If you take one single item, I will be on the phone with the police reporting grand theft. I assure you, you do not want to be involved in this." The 2 men, who were probably just college kids trying to make a buck, exchanged an uneasy look. They looked from my determined face to Jessica's enraged one. "Sorry, lady," the bigger one said to Jessica, shrugging. "We're not touching anything without the homeowner's permission." They turned and walked back to their truck. Jessica's face went purple. "You will regret this, you old hag," she shrieked as the truck rumbled away. I stood there, my heart pounding, watching her. The desperation had curdled into pure, venomous hatred. She had been so sure she could outsmart me, so confident in her own greed. Now she was like a cornered rat, ready to bite anything that moved. I grabbed my suitcases and got Buddy into Brenda's car. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw her standing on the lawn, surrounded by the ghosts of her failed plans. My favorite armchair, which the movers had apparently already taken out, sat forlornly on the grass, a casualty of her foiled heist. I should have felt triumphant, but I just felt weary down to my bones. As the moving truck sped away, leaving my favorite armchair sitting on the lawn, I realized they weren't just trying to get assets anymore. They were trying to break my spirit. That evening, sitting in the peaceful quiet of Brenda's spare bedroom, the adrenaline finally wore off, leaving behind a deep hollow ache. The rage was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but it was now joined by an overwhelming wave of grief. Brenda had an old trunk filled with photo albums, and we found ourselves flipping through them, looking for pictures from our younger days. And then I saw it. A photo from about 15 years ago. It was from a 4th of July barbecue in my old backyard. In the picture, a 10-year-old Michael was grinning from ear to ear, his face smeared with chocolate ice cream. He was holding up a sparkler, and his eyes were full of pure, uncomplicated joy. I was standing beside him, my arm around his shoulders, laughing, my breath caught in my throat. Where did that boy go? As I stared at the faded photograph, the pieces started to click into place in a new, more painful way. Michael wasn't born a monster. I knew that. He had been a sweet kid, a little sensitive, maybe a little too eager to please, but he had a good heart. He loved fishing with his dad. He used to pick me wilting dandelions from the yard and present them to me like they were roses. And then, in college, he met Jessica. Jessica came from a family with money, but it was new money, and they were desperate to prove it. She was obsessed with appearances, with brands, with what the neighbors thought. Her entire sense of self-worth was tied up in what she owned and the image she projected. From the very beginning, she saw me as a liability. I was a working-class nurse. I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I represented everything she was trying to escape. I remembered little things, comments I had brushed off at the time. The way she'd wrinkle her nose when I'd serve dinner on my everyday Corelle dishes instead of the fine china. The way she'd talk about her friends' parents who had helped them out, with a down payment on a condo in a trendy part of the city. A clear dig at the fact that Michael was still living at home. I was an embarrassment to her. My presence in the house she so desperately wanted to show off as her own was a constant, humiliating reminder that they weren't the successful, independent power couple she pretended they were. They needed my house. They needed my help. And she hated me for it. And Michael, my poor weak son. He loved her, and he was terrified of losing her. He saw how she looked at her friends' husbands who drove BMWs and whose parents paid for their European vacations. He felt inadequate. And Jessica, master manipulator that she was, found a way to channel all of his insecurity, all of his fear of not being good enough for her, and redirect it as resentment towards me. It wasn't my fault he wasn't a high-powered executive. It wasn't my fault he had student loans. But in Jessica's twisted narrative, I became the scapegoat. I was the one holding them back. My simple, unglamorous existence was the anchor weighing down their ascent into the social stratosphere she craved. It was a slow poisoning carried out over years. A whisper here, a complaint there. She turned my love into a burden, my help into a handicap. She convinced him that I was the source of his problems, and that cutting me out was the only way to prove he was a man. He wasn't a villain in a play. He was a puppet, and she was pulling all the strings. Realizing this didn't lessen my anger, but it changed its shape. It was no longer a sharp, hot rage. It was a heavy, profound sorrow. The anger was for Jessica, the conniving viper who had sunk her fangs into my family. But the sorrow was all for Michael. For the sweet boy in the photograph, and for the hollowed-out man he had become. He had traded his mother's unconditional love for the conditional approval of a woman who would likely discard him the moment he ceased to be useful. He hadn't just pushed me out of a house. He had allowed her to surgically remove his own conscience. Looking at the photo of the sweet boy I had raised, I mourned him as if he were already gone. Because the man living upstairs in my house, the one trying to steal my future, had become a stranger to me. The final day arrived not with a bang, but with a phone call. It was Monday morning. I was at Brenda's drinking coffee and trying to calm my frayed nerves. Frank Henderson's number flashed on the screen. "Carol, good news," he said, his voice brisk. "The Millers are eager beavers. Their financing came through even faster than expected. They want to know if there's any chance we can close today instead of tomorrow. They're ready to sign and take possession this afternoon." Today. The word hung in the air electric. It meant no more sleepless nights. No more waiting for their next attack. It meant freedom, and it was less than a few hours away. "Yes, Frank," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Let's do it. Tell them I'll be ready at 3 o'clock. The next few hours were a whirlwind. I called the small local moving company I had on standby. They were saints and agreed to meet me at the house in an hour to get the last of my things. My bed, my dresser, my suitcases. Bill Davis, my lawyer, agreed to be there at 3 to oversee the final signing. Everything was falling into place. When the movers and I arrived at the house, Michael and Jessica were gone. A small mercy. We worked quickly, the movers professionally and efficiently clearing out my small bedroom. The house felt eerily empty now, stripped of all personality, just a shell waiting for a new family to fill it with life. At 2:45, I was loading the last box of linens into my car when a sleek black Mercedes SUV pulled into the driveway with a self-important crunch of gravel. A woman in a razor-sharp, ridiculously expensive-looking power suit stepped out. She radiated an aura of aggressive competence. Michael and Jessica got out of the passenger side, looking grim but determined. The woman strode towards me, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Carol Peterson?" she asked, her voice as sharp as her suit. "Yes. I am Susan Adler, legal counsel for Mr. and Mrs. Michael Peterson," she announced, as if presenting her credentials to the Queen. "We are here to serve you with this." She pulled a document from her portfolio with a theatrical flourish. "It's an emergency motion, filed this morning and granted by a judge just an hour ago. It is a temporary order of suspension, halting the sale and transfer of this property, effective immediately." For a second my heart stopped. A court order? How? On what grounds? I managed to ask, my voice tight. Miss Adler gave a smug smile. "On the grounds of fraudulent conveyance. Our motion alleges that you have conspired to sell a primary family asset significantly below market value, in order to deliberately hide assets, and deprive your son of his rightful future inheritance." It was ludicrous. Frank had the official appraisal. The Miller's offer was over asking price. It was a lie, a desperate last-ditch lie. But it was a lie on a legal document signed by a judge. Just as panic began to bubble in my chest, Bill Davis's sensible Ford sedan pulled up behind the Mercedes. He got out, took one look at the situation, and let out a weary sigh. He walked over and took the document from the lawyer's hand. He scanned it briefly. Then he actually chuckled. A low, dry sound. "Susan, you're getting sloppy in your old age," he said, his tone one of mild amusement. "Judge Miller granted this? You must have caught him right before his lunch break. Did you happen to mention to him that I had already filed a complete financial disclosure this morning, including the certified property appraisal and the competing offers that Mrs. Peterson received?" The lawyer's smug smile faltered. "That information is pending review." "Is it?" Bill pulled out his cell phone. "Let's find out." He dialed a number. "Hi, Mary, it's Bill Davis. Could you please put me through to Judge Miller's chambers?" "Yes, it's urgent. It's regarding the Peterson property motion he just signed." While he waited, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. Michael was shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to look at me. Jessica was glaring at me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Bill started talking. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand. No, she wasn't served. Yes, that's correct, 10% over asking, all cash. Yes, I have the certified appraisal right here." "Absolutely." He listened for another moment. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your time." He hung up and gave Susan Adler a polite, pitying smile. "The judge has vacated his order. He sends his apologies for the confusion, and suggests you might want to verify your client's information more thoroughly next time." The color drained from the lawyer's face. She snatched the now useless court order from Bill's hand, stuffed it back in her portfolio, and marched back to her car without another word. Defeated. At that exact moment, A modest minivan pulled into the driveway. It was the Millers, right on time, their two young children peering excitedly out the back window. The final signing took place on the hood of Bill's car. The mobile notary checked our IDs and stamped the documents with a satisfying thud. I signed over the deed, my hand steady. Dr. Miller handed me a certified check for the full amount. It was done. I took the old set of house keys from my pocket. I walked over to the Millers, who were beaming. "Welcome home," I said, pressing the keys into Mrs. Miller's hand. Then I turned and looked at my son. He was just standing there on the lawn of the house I had bought for him, his face a blank mask of shock. Jessica was whispering furiously into his ear. They looked small and pathetic. As I drove away with Brenda, my lawyer following behind me, I saw them in my rearview mirror, standing lost on the porch of a house that was no longer theirs. I thought it was finally over. But they had one last, pathetic card left to play. I spent that first night of freedom at Brenda's house. For the first time in years, I slept through the entire night. No waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding. No listening for angry footsteps on the stairs. Just deep, peaceful, restorative sleep. The next morning, I was sitting at Brenda's kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through apartment listings online, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello. Am I speaking with Carol Peterson?" A gruff, official-sounding voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Ma'am, this is Detective Miller with the City Police Department. I need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." My blood went cold all over again. "The police? What is this about, detective?" There was a pause, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "Ma'am, your son and daughter-in-law, Michael and Jessica Peterson, filed a report late last night. They are accusing you of theft. They've provided a list of personal belongings they claim you stole from the residence during the move." I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, incredulous bark of a laugh. They were shameless. Absolutely, utterly shameless. "Detective," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I will be there in 1 hour. And I'll be bringing my lawyer." I called Bill Davis, who just sighed and said, "Of course they did. Don't worry, Carol. I'll meet you there." Before we went to the station, we made a quick stop at my storage unit. I unlocked the metal door and pulled out a large accordion file. It was my secret weapon, the one I had been preparing for weeks, hoping I'd never have to use it. We walked into the police station and were shown to a small gray interview room. Detective Miller was a big, weary-looking man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Michael and Jessica were not there. "Ma'am, Mr. Davis," he said, nodding to us. He slid a piece of paper across the metal table. "This is the list of stolen items provided by the complainants." I looked at it. It was a pathetic collection of things they thought sounded valuable. The living room sofa set. A collection of antique-looking paintings. The high-end espresso machine. And in a final audacious move, they had listed my portable fireproof safe, the one where I kept my most important documents. They were probably hoping the police would confiscate it, giving them one last chance to get their hands on the sales contract. Without a word, I opened my accordion file on the table. The sound it made, a soft whoosh of paper, was the only sound in the room. "Detective," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Let's go down the list, shall we?" I pulled out the first document. The sofa set. Here is the receipt from Ashley Furniture. Dated October 2018. Paid in full with my Visa card. Ending in 4277. As you can see, the statement is in my name, Carol Peterson. I slid it across the table. The detective's eyebrows went up. "The paintings," I continued, pulling out another folder. "Here are the receipts from the 3 art galleries I purchased them from over the last decade. Again, all in my name, all paid for from my personal checking account." Another slide. His expression was now one of growing interest. "The espresso machine. A Christmas gift I bought for myself last year. Here is the Amazon order confirmation, and the corresponding credit card statement." Slide. "And finally," I said, saving the best for last, "the portable safe. Here is the warranty card which I filled out the day I bought it at Staples. And here is the bank statement showing the purchase. They claim I stole a safe containing their important documents. Detective, my question is, why would their important documents be in a safe that I purchased, and for which I am the only person who knows the combination. I sat back, my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me. Bill Davis leaned forward. "Detective," he said smoothly, "what you have here is not a theft report. It's a textbook case of malicious prosecution and harassment. My client has been subjected to a campaign of intimidation by these two individuals for weeks." Detective Miller looked at the mountain of evidence I had provided. He looked at the flimsy, one-page complaint form. He scrubbed a hand over his tired face and let out a long sigh. He closed the file. "Ma'am, Mr. Davis, thank you for coming in. I think it's clear this report has no merit. I will be closing the case as unfounded. I apologize for having to bring you down here." As we stood up to leave, I felt a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It was the last chain. The last desperate, pathetic attempt to control me. And it had failed spectacularly. But the final victory came later that day. Bill called me. "You're not going to believe this, Carol," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I did a little digging after we left the station. I had a hunch. It turns out, last week, someone also tried to open 3 high-limit credit cards online using your name and social security number. The applications were flagged by the credit bureau's fraud alerts and were immediately declined. They had tried everything: forgery, theft, fraud, and they had failed at every turn. Leaving that police station, I felt the very last chain holding me to them break. They had nothing left to throw at me. Now the only thing left to do was to start living for myself. The apartment I found was perfect. It was a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a quiet, well-maintained building, with a small balcony that overlooked a beautiful city park. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, making the whole place feel bright and hopeful. After the oppressive gloom of my old house, it felt like stepping into the light. The first few weeks were a revelation. I unpacked not just my belongings but myself. I rediscovered the woman I was before I became just Mom. I bought a new set of vibrant, colorful dishes because I wanted to. I painted the living room a cheerful shade of sunny yellow. I filled the balcony with pots of geraniums and petunias. The silence in my apartment wasn't the tense, angry silence I had grown used to. It was a peaceful silence, one I could fill with whatever I chose. I played classical music in the mornings. I listened to audiobooks while I cooked. I started talking to myself and to Buddy without fear of being overheard or judged. I began to reclaim the simple joys I had forgotten. Every morning, Buddy and I would walk through the park across the street. We'd watch the seasons change, from the crisp reds and golds of autumn to the first delicate green shoots of spring. I joined a water aerobics class at the local YMCA. And to my surprise, I made friends. Women my age, widows and divorcees who had their own stories of resilience. We'd go for coffee after class, our laughter echoing in the small cafe. On Tuesdays, I enrolled in a pottery class at the Community Art Center. The feeling of the cool, wet clay spinning beneath my hands was incredibly therapeutic. It felt like I was molding my own life into a new, more beautiful shape. I wasn't very good at it. My first few bowls were lopsided and wobbly, but it didn't matter. It was mine. The joy was in the creation, not the perfection. Brenda and I became inseparable. We joined the volunteer group that tended to the public gardens by the lake. We spent wonderful Saturday mornings with our hands in the dirt, planting flowers and pulling weeds, gossiping and laughing until our sides hurt. It was a simple, honest joy, the kind I hadn't felt in years. I realized I hadn't truly laughed, not a real belly-deep laugh, in a very long time. One evening, I invited a few of my new friends from the Y over for dinner. I cooked a big pot of lasagna, and we sat around my small dining table, sharing food and stories. As I looked at their smiling faces, bathed in the warm light of my new home, a profound understanding settled over me. This was family. Not the one defined by blood, but the one defined by respect, kindness, and mutual support. The happiness in that room was real. It wasn't something I had to buy or sacrifice for. It was something I had built. I never heard from Michael or Jessica again. Through the town grapevine, I heard they had moved into a cramped, overpriced apartment across town. I heard Michael had to take a second job on weekends to make ends meet. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of something. Not pity, but a sad, clinical acknowledgement of the life my son had chosen. He had traded a foundation of love and security for a life built on the shaky ground of greed and entitlement. That was his choice and those were his consequences. My story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about the moment a parent realizes that their love is not a blank check for disrespect, and their sacrifice is not an open invitation for abuse. Choosing to walk away to protect your own peace and dignity isn't selfish. It's survival. It's remembering that before you were a mother, you were a person, and that person deserves happiness too. Standing on my balcony at night, looking at the twinkling city lights, I often think about the life I have now. It's smaller than the one I had before, but it's infinitely larger. It's a life that belongs completely to me. And that feeling I now know is the only inheritance that truly matters. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it can help someone else who might be feeling trapped or disrespected. I have a question for all of you. What is one piece of advice you would give to someone who is just starting to reclaim their own life? Please share your wisdom in the comments below. Your story could be the light someone else needs to find their way. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult times. You are not alone.